Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. My name is Kim Stetz, and I am one of the grade 9-10 counselors here at IS Manila. The section that you are currently attending is entitled College Admissions Testing. This is often one of those subjects that produces a lot of questions in many parents and students. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, if you're already coming in with some of those questions, they will be answered for you this evening. So to test or not to test, I think that is always one of the big questions. As we start working with our grade 9 and 10 students, whether that's myself or Ms. Capuccio, I think we often start having those questions be asked from our students. As they're starting to think about the pre-ACTs and the PSATs and the timelines of the exams and when they should take those, it always produces a lot of questions that students really need to take some time to think about. So which test is going to be the best test for you is something that we are going to discuss this evening. How the IB full diploma may play into your decision or may not play into your decision is definitely going to be something we discuss. Advanced placement tests. Do taking an advanced placement course and or test, does that really improve your chances of admission into a university? And subject tests, what are those and how are those different from the SAT reasoning exam? All pretty common questions that we often have from students and parents. So what to expect today? We are going to go through all of these different acronyms of exams or course programs. As you've probably seen at ISM, we do have many acronyms for many different things. So we will make sure that we go through each of these and that you have a better understanding of what each means and how it's going to impact you as you are applying, if this is a student watching, or as a parent, how you can help your child make some decisions in which exam is going to be best for them. So some basics as you start out. Again, in grade 9 or 10, if you're meeting with myself or Ms. Capuccio, a lot of the questions are coming up as to a timeline and what that plan is going to look like for you. So meeting with your counselor is extremely important and beneficial, whether that's a grade 9-10 counselor or as you start going up in grades with your 11th and 12th counselor and really coming up with a good solid plan for your individual trajectory. It is always the responsibility of the student to be aware of the specific requirements for the university or college and as well as the country that you intend on applying to. As you're going to see when you start going through this process, you're going to hear the words "it depends" quite often. Because it does really depend. It depends on the country and what those requirements are. It depends on the university within that region and what the requirements are. So it is going to take a lot of responsibility on the student to really research exactly what needs to happen. From there, once you've done your research, that's a great time to bring any questions, concerns, ideas to brainstorm with your counselor. It's a great time to bring that back and talk it through with them to figure out what is the best plan for you. COVID-19. I know that there are several of you that are watching this presentation right now that are saying, what are we doing in the world in terms of standardized testing? And how is COVID-19 impacting that, right? Because we are seeing in many regions that SATs and ACT exams have been canceled. I know that several of you have already seen that here, unfortunately, with our last several months, that some things we've had to postpone. So COVID-19 has definitely changed testing policies around the world. Hopefully, those policies will continue to be changed and evolved. I think that one of the positive things, if there are any that could come out of COVID, is that some universities are really, reanalyzing the way that they have done reasoning or the way that they have really held the weight of standardized exams in the past. So maybe we are trending in a new direction. So we will talk primarily about SAT and ACT sort of in the past and how it's always been, but I will here and there highlight some changes that have happened because of COVID-19. So let's jump right in and start looking at the SAT reasoning test. SAT stands for Scholastic Aptitude Test. There are two components. There's a critical reading and math with an optional essay. 1600 is the highest possible score that a student can receive. And it's generally about a 3-hour exam plus 50 minutes for that optional essay. So the SAT more typically evaluates problem solving and evaluates critical thinking skills rather than the overall educational development, which is what the ACT is going to be looking at. So who should be applying for the SAT? Students applying to the US and to Asia, and to students without the full IB diploma. So for some students, if for whatever reason the IB full diploma is not for them, or they are attempting to go into a major and they need to take some classes outside of the very strict rules and regulations of the IB diploma, so that eliminates them from taking that full IB, the SAT may be a good alternative option. Like, for instance, the UK, Australia, they're very heavily focused on looking at the scores of the full IB diploma. But for some of those students that don't have the opportunity to take that, but still want to apply to the UK or to Australia, may be accepted with an SAT or an ACT. How to register, this link here is live, and we will be sending out these slides for you after the presentation. So you can use the College Board website to answer any questions that you still may have, to register for the exam once you're ready. There's some practice tests on there that are pretty neat that you can use, that are free, and that you may want to go through. ISM is a closed test site. So what that means is that we only allow our students that are enrolled at the ISM institution to test on our campus. So this code is a confidential code, and it is only used for ISM students. So it's important for you to make note of the number, but it's also important for you to keep it confidential, so that way the number is not getting out to students that aren't part of the ISM community. So again, it is an aptitude test, testing those reasoning and verbal and critical thinking skills. There's the two sections, the math, and then the reading and writing, which is based into two smaller components, but it's held into one. And you can see the breakdown of the time there that it takes for each section. The scoring goes from 400 being the lowest to 1600 being the highest. 800 is the highest possible score for each section. There's no penalty for guessing. So this has gone back and forth a few times. This has changed a few times. But right now, there is no penalty for guessing on the SAT. So if there is something that you're unsure of or you just don't know, it makes sense to put something down, make your best educated guess, and put down something, because you won't lose points for making an inaccurate guess. The optional essay, that's something there that we had mentioned that some universities require, some universities recommend, others you don't have to take it. We always say that it probably makes sense for you to take the optional essay or complete it at least once. Even if some of your universities don't require or recommend it, because you just never know. In 2 to 3 months' time, you may come across a university that you really never thought about before, and it really interests you. And if you had already sat for the SAT exam and did not take that optional essay, and you scored really well, but unfortunately this new university that you stumbled across requires it, you're going to have to go back and take the SAT exam all over again, because you can't just sit the optional essay component. So for me, I think it kind of makes sense for you to take it and to have it in your back pocket in case you need it. So that way you don't end up in a jam. The questions, there's going to be a greater emphasis on the meaning of words. That's the contextual version, and on how word choice shapes meaning, tone, and impact. There's a more advanced math component with the SAT as opposed to the ACT. And there is a math section that you're going to have to complete without the use of a calculator. So sometimes this is helpful in determining whether or not a student wants to look at the ACT versus ACT. If a student is really weaker in math and feels as though they're just not going to score very well there, they may want to consider the ACT, where it is a bit of a less advanced component as opposed to the SAT. The SAT subject tests, so those are going to be separate than the SAT reasoning exam. The SAT subject tests are going to be more curriculum based. So they're hour-long exams that focus in English literature, history, your foreign language, mathematics, and sciences. So all of the things that you're going to be learning as a student in your classes at ISM. Who's generally going to be taking those exams? Usually the students that are applying to the more selective US colleges. Many of those colleges are going to recommend or require you to take a subject test. Also, for students that are enrolling or applying for a specific major within a university, you may have to take an SAT subject test in that area in order to be accepted into that specific major. You can take up to 3 exams in one sitting. That's a lot. 2 is probably more typical. But again, for some of your more selective universities, if you're looking at Georgetown or Johns Hopkins, they're going to recommend 3 subject tests. You cannot take them on the same day as your SAT reasoning exam, which is good. That's too much testing for one day. I know some students say, you know what, I just want to get it all out of the way. But it's better to break it up. So I'm glad that the SAT does not allow you to do that, because it's just too much testing in one day. So you do have to do it separately. If you are interested in taking a foreign language subject test, there are 2 options. There's a foreign language exam with the listening component, and then there's one without the listening component. Most universities, if you are going to go the foreign language route, they're going to prefer that you take the subject test with the listening component. So that's important to note, that subject exam with that component is only offered in November. So again, when you're going through your timeline, that's really important to take note of if you are going to be sitting that subject exam. We do recommend for a timeline that you take the subject tests either in June of your junior year or early November of your senior year. The reason for that is, again, because these tests can be studied for. You're going to learn this in your curriculum at ISM. So if you're in class and you're focused and you're paying attention, you're keeping up with your studies, you're going to be better prepared for those subject exams at the end of your junior year or early senior year, as opposed to coming in junior year and taking it right off the bat before you're sitting through the year-long course. So advice for those subject tests: study, study, study. Pay attention in class. Learn the material. That's going to be very important. A good score, if you're looking at the more highly selective universities and colleges, they're looking for subject scores that are about 700 plus, so pretty high scores there. If it's not required, some students say, should I take it if it's not required? If you think you can score really well in one of those specific subject areas, then yeah, it can help your application. But again, don't take too many. Focus on 2 or 3. US college and universities, they don't want you to test. They want you doing other things as well. So you want to be really careful in the amounts of times that you're taking the tests. Um, so take what you can score well on, play into your strengths and your interests. If English is not your primary native language, so say for instance, Spanish is your mother tongue language, we don't recommend that you take a language subject test in Spanish. We don't recommend that you take that language subject test in your first language. So ACT, formerly known as American College Testing, it's similar to the SAT, but the ACT includes a science section, which is you're not going to see in the SAT. Again, you'll see some science questions within the SAT exam, but you're not going to have a whole component focused primarily on science, which you do in the ACT. So a lot of students who are really focused on a STEM track, if they're looking at science, technology, engineering, they may want to consider the ACT because it has that science section. So this will help students connect their strengths and their career and study paths in a way that may not have been otherwise considered. You may want to think about going the ACT route if you're going towards the STEM field. Again, there is an optional essay there. Probably recommend you take it, have that in your back pocket in case you do need a plan B or a plan C. Scoring is going to be different. So 36 is the highest possible score on the SAT. Similar timing, 3 hours plus 50 minutes for the optional essay. Same qualifications on who should be taking the exam. Really, we're looking for the US, and for certain schools in Asia, they're also going to be looking for the exam. Students without the IB diploma, same rules apply there. It makes sense to take one or the other if you don't have the full IB. It's going to be a different registration website there for the ACT, so this is also live for you. And it does have a different closed code there. And we are a test site and it is closed, but it is a different code. So you'll want to take note of that as well. ACT is computer-based, which is different than the SAT. SAT is still your generic paper and pencil-based test. This is a really important difference. Because some students find that they generally test much better on a computer, where other students don't. They say they want that pen and paper. They want that tactile feel of having a test in front of them. So definitely something to consider and to reflect on your own personal learning styles and how you think you would operate better. The questions do adapt to the test taker. So for instance, if a student has 3 or 4 very difficult questions in a row and is having a hard time answering those, the computer test will take note of that, and it will maybe change the level of difficulty and send the test taker some questions that are a little easier. So that way it doesn't overwhelm the student. So the ACT exam is not going to look the same as the student sitting next to you, because it is going to adapt to the level of difficulty and how you're answering those questions. The ACT is broken down into 4 sections. You can take note of the amount of questions and the time there. Again, the scoring is 1 through 36, and it's going to average all 4 of those sections together. I already spoke about the STEM track and why that may be helpful if you are going into that trajectory. The other nice thing about the ACT that the SAT does not do is that with the ELA scores, the ELA for ACT enables the students to see how their performance compares with others who have already been identified as college ready. So it takes your score and gives you data and compares your data and your score to other students that are also college ready, which is really nice if you want to compare where you are against other students. In order to receive that little perk, I guess, if you will, you have to take the optional essay for the ACT. So in order to, receive that data, that comparable data, you do have to sit the optional essay in order to have that completed and sent for you. Again, there's no penalty for guessing, so definitely put down something. Optional essay, less advanced math. We had talked about that. So you definitely may want to consider the ACT if you feel that you have a weakness in math. And the nice thing about it being computer-based, of course, we love technology, is that you find out the score within 2 business days. SAT is definitely going to take a little bit longer for turnover, but with the ACT, because it's computer-based, you find out your results a bit quicker. So here are your high school codes. Again, these links are all live. You will receive access to this. So this will be important for you to have when you are going to be signing up and registering for either or exam. So some standardized testing policies. This is in kind of a pre-COVID-19 era. That's where this stat is from fairtest.org. Fairtest has been pushing for more U.S. universities to eliminate the SAT or ACTs. So prior to COVID, more than 1,050 four-year colleges and universities in the U.S. do not use SAT or ACT to admit substantial numbers of bachelor degree applicants. So that's really progressive. With COVID, we're actually, and I do have this statistic as well in here, we're moving towards more schools that are not using the standardized exams for acceptance. So we're hoping that we can see that trend continue. We do see that there are some benefits for that for some students. With that being said, however, international students may still be required to take one of those reasoning exams, regardless of your passport. So say, for instance, you are a U.S. citizen, but you are an international student. You may still have to take the SAT or ACT. So these are one of the things that you really want to research as you go along in your process. This list here is fantastic. I'll actually pull it up for you. This is something you want to star for future reference. It's constantly being updated and has a lot of special notes in here in regards to the rules around 2021 admissions due to COVID. So as you can see here, it's constantly being updated with the different universities, what international students need to do, what international students at U.S. high schools need to do, whether there are some temporary SAT optionals for applicants coming up. So this is definitely a great website that you want to hang on to and use for your future as you're planning. Sorry, now let's go. Okay, so may still be required if students are applying for scholarship. So for students that may be looking at a specific U.S. university that does not require submission of SAT or ACT, but you are applying for a scholarship, that specific university may require you to submit testing scores if you're applying for a scholarship. Again, something to just make a mental note of and to know that you may need to research that in the future if you are planning to apply for a scholarship. So test flexible, that's a term that you're going to hear. And what does that mean? If a university is test flexible, does it mean you have the option whether or not to submit a test score? Not really. It means that you are flexible on what is submitted. So for example, NYU, they're test flexible. They are saying that for admission, you need one or the other. So you have the option of submitting an SAT or ACT, or you may have the option of 3 IB higher level exam scores. So there are different options. So the flexibility means, you can or you can't. It means that there are different options that you are able to pursue if you are looking to apply there for NYU. So test flexible means you have options. Test optional. So test optional means that you basically have the option to submit or not to submit. And it depends on what the specific university requirements are saying. For George Washington University, for example, they are a school that's test optional, except for these very specific reasons. So if you fall into one of these applicants, if you're, NCAA, if you've been homeschooled, there are certain requirements in which you do have to submit a testing score, even though they're a test optional school. So you want to make sure that, again, you're researching that university and you're really looking at what is required there. So for George Washington, it says down the bottom here, they have no minimum GPA or SAT, ACT requirements, but admittedly, they do recognize that they're a highly competitive school. And typically they have strong academic students that are applying and being accepted. But again, schools that are test optional, you have the option. You have the option of doing either or. Score choice. So for score choice, the College Board and ACT allows you to choose which scores you submit from specific test dates. So for instance, if a student sits the exam, the SAT, we'll say, twice, and does really well on one day and maybe a little bit less on a different day, score choice means that you can submit that score from that specific day. So you don't have to necessarily submit one or the other. You are submitting the test that you do really well on. In schools, they're really only going to use the highest score anyway. But with score choice, you're able to use that as your is what's going on your transcript for the score that's being highlighted. The College Board says that they're your scores. They are. It's kind of an ethical thing here. You need to sign a form that says you've submitted all of the scores for all of the exams that you've taken. So the universities are going to see all of those scores. But with score choice, you're again highlighting your scores that you do best on. You have to sign off on the form that says you submit them. Whether or not you do, that's your own ethical dilemma. We recommend that all students submit everything, but again, that's your morality there on whether or not you choose to submit everything, but they do expect that you do. Using score choice typically does not make you a better applicant, again, because the schools are primarily going to use the highest scores anyways, so it doesn't really, but they're also going to see the other schools, so it doesn't really make you a better applicant. It's just going to show what your highest score is. Superscoring. Superscoring is the process of taking the highest scores of each section across all the dates you took in the test. So example, you can see here in math, in December, a student received a 580, but in May, they received a 650. Oh, apologies there. So going down the bottom, you can see the total in December versus the total in May and the total in September. So you can super score those averages to send the highest score across all sections. Again, they're going to still see the other scores, but they can see and may take into account the super score that is there, which is the average of all of the highest. Some test prep here. These are some of the test prep websites that our students have used in the past. Khan Academy, I know that many of you have already heard of because it can be helpful if you need some assistance for an individual class. Khan Academy does also have some test prep that is free for students. So it's really nice to kind of look through some of these to help with the preparation of any of the exams that we have discussed. So, standardized testing in times of COVID-19. Um, in March of 2020, our world changed, right? It is a very different place for so many very different reasons. So it would be impossible for universities to require and have the same expectations for our students as we did in the past. It's just not possible. So according to a statement that was released by the fairtest.org on September 10th of this year, more than 2/3 of four-year college and universities in the US will not require applicants to submit ACT or SAT for fall 2021 admission. Um, Again, I spoke of this prior a little while ago. We do hope that this continues to evolve and develop, especially for future admission policies. We don't exactly know what the trend of COVID-19 is going to be in the next year, in the next 2 years. So as the SAT and ACT admission requirements continue to evolve, I think we're going to continue to see that as we move along. Because we just don't know. We just don't know where the world's going to be in a year or 2 years. So we need to make sure that we, have an understanding that some of these policies will continue to develop as we move forward, and hopefully trend in the direction that Fair Test had released. Hopefully more universities and colleges will follow that. Test optional really truly means test optional. If a school says they're test optional, take that as it is. They're not kidding. They're really saying that you do not have to submit that. 725 plus colleges and universities have announced test optional policies since COVID-19. This link here is live, and it will bring you to fairtest.org. That is also going to give you a list of all of those colleges, the names of those colleges and universities, and the ones that have since gone test optional. So no student will be penalized for the absence of a standardized test score if that certain university or college is claiming that they are test optional. So that's great news. University of California. The UC school is the largest public university system in the US to make such an impactful change. They have gone test optional, and then they're going test blind, which is absolutely amazing. So for fall 2021, test optional means that you have the option as to whether or not you submit that score. So there may be some of you out there that are applying for this current school year and you already have that test score in your back pocket prior to COVID, so you can submit it. But if you are in that cohort of students that didn't have the opportunity, or maybe you didn't score as well, and then COVID hit and you didn't have another opportunity, you see they have gone test optional. So you don't have to provide those scores. I did make a note here that there are some exceptions there. So you just may want to look over that. You can still submit if you need course placement. You may choose to consider your test scores as part of the application review process, but no admission is going to be based just on that single factor of whether or not you submit your SAT or ACT. For fall of 2023 and 2024 enrollment, the UC schools have now gone test blind. And what that means is that the UC won't use your test scores to make admissions decisions. So that is fantastic, that the UC is kind of making this trend to say, hey, we are going in a different direction, and we recognize what COVID has done to our students and what it's taken away. So we are saying that we don't need the test scores at all for those 2 specific years of enrollment. Again, some scholarships, there's always those little caveats, those little disclaimers that we need to pay attention to. If you're going for scholarships, if you're looking for a specific major, sometimes you do just need to read that fine print. But we're really excited. We are really hopeful that where University of California is setting this example, that other schools will follow suit. So let's talk over a little bit about some exams for students whose primary language is not English, so English as a second language. The TOEFL is one popular exam that you have probably heard of. It stands for the Test of English as a Foreign Language. Who is eligible to sit the TOEFL? Passport holders of non-English speaking countries, including the Philippines. Those students are often expected to submit a TOEFL score, and TOEFL is used more for US applications. So they're offered several times per month at various locations in Manila. Unfortunately, ISM is not a test center as of yet. If possible, we do recommend that students take the TOEFL before their senior year begins. It's just helpful. The senior year gets very busy with writing college essays and the application process, that it's really nice to have that TOEFL off of a student's plate, if possible, before the senior year. Again, here is the website that you can use and scroll through at your leisure if you do need to sign up for the TOEFL exam. Many students and parents are going to ask, are there exceptions? If I am a non-English primary speaker and I'm in the Philippines, but I have been I've been at ISM and I've been in an English curriculum for years, are there exceptions to the rules? And yes, quite often there are exceptions. We will get to that. Let me backtrack here. I will backtrack for you here. Going over I don't want to skip this one and really give you a bit more information in the TOEFL and what it does entail as an exam. Different components, the reading, writing, speaking, and listening. The exam is about 3 hours and 10 minutes. It is an internet-based test, so it is computer-based. It ranges from 0 to 120, 0 to 30 for each subtest. A score of 90 plus is needed for most colleges and universities. So that's kind of the score for the TOEFL that students are aiming for, is that 90 plus. Schools like UCLA, they're going to like a score of 108 plus. So that's definitely a bit higher for UCLA. The IELTS is a different form of an English proficiency exam. Apologies. So the IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System. You're going to, if you are a candidate for UK applications, most likely you're going to sit the IELTS as opposed to the TOEFL. So passport holders of non-English speaking countries, including the Philippines, are often expected to submit an IELTS score more for those UK applications, primarily because there's some visa purposes that go behind that, that you'll be better off taking the IELTS for UK. Same time frame, about 3 times per month at various locations in Manila, not a test center at ISM. Recommend to take before senior year, and another live website here that you can go to for a bit more information. Same components, reading, listening, speaking and writing, 2 hours and 45 minutes, so a little less time. Paper-based or computer-delivered options. So as a student, you have the option there to do one or the other, which is nice. A 0 through 9 score range, and it's going to be an average of all 4 of those sections. So for the IELTS, you're looking to aim for a 6 plus on your exam. Here we go, back to what I had started with. Can you get an exemption for either TOEFL or IELTS? Yes, you can, but again, it's going to depend on that institution and that country. So this is where that research comes in. You want to make sure that you are carefully checking over each institution. Some universities will exempt on English proficiency testing within their school. So for instance, IB courses, if a student is taking 2 years of an IB English literature class at higher level, that may be an exception. SAT or ACT scores, some universities will say, depending on how a student, their score in those exams, will take that as opposed to the TOEFL or the IELTS. Some schools look at the AP scores. Being in an English-speaking high school for 3+ years, some universities will use that as an exception. So there are options out there. It's just, again, it comes back to the specific university. So it depends, and something to be researched. Here's an example, for instance, from Northeastern. So Northeastern is a school, it's become very popular in the last several years for our students to attend. They do have a policy on waiving the English proficiency requirement. So you can kind of go down the list here in what determines that exemption. So for instance, IB English A in language or in language and literature at the higher level or standard level. So they're looking at both, which is great. IB English B at the higher level. So there are exceptions to the rule. So again, it's really looking through the different universities and what those offer. University of British Columbia, UBC, another very popular school for our students to attend. They have exemptions. Ones here that are highlighted that apply to us a bit more: achieve a final grade of 4 or better in advanced placement, English language, and composition. Or if you achieve a final grade of 5 or better in the IB English A. Great. Number 8, attend 4 or more years at an eligible international secondary school that uses English as the language of instruction, but operates in a country where the primary language is not English. And this is here another live link, so that can bring you to the list of what those eligible international schools are, and ISM is one of them. So again, there are exemptions. 2 of our big schools that we send a lot of students to do have some options there for our students whose primary language is not English. So for COVID-19, COVID-19 has not stopped TOEFL or IELTS testing requirements. Some of them are still moving forward with those. However, they have implemented opportunities for students to take those exams in the comfort of their own home. So in light of COVID, instead of having to go to a testing center, they are offering you to be able to take that in your house on your computer. So not having to go to a testing center. So there's an online version for both of those courses. Duolingo is also another test that many universities are also accepting right now in light of COVID and not being able to either sit the IELTS or the TOEFL. And that also comes up in that other link that I brought you to. The one that I said is very important for you to keep handy somewhere. Those do list if Duolingo is an acceptable exception there. IB. So many of you probably are already aware of the IB diploma and what that means, but we can just briefly go over it since ISM is an IB diploma school. Generally, the IB is required in Europe and Australia, although there are other pathways, which I may have mentioned previously, that some of those schools that require the IB diploma will make exceptions if a student sits the SAT or the ACT. Again, so there are some other alternative options out there. There are also programs that students are able to take in between high school and university. Say, for instance, in Australia, if a student doesn't take the full IB, there are programs that will help prep students get ready for those universities in Australia if they were not a full IB student. IB diploma students are exempted from the ACT, SAT requirements in Canada and at some universities in Asia. Again, so looking, making sure you do your research. But great to know that in Canada, if you're doing the full IB, you can be exempted from sitting those exams. ISM does report all predicted scores for all ISM candidates. And with UK and Australia, they set up conditions for acceptance. And you're expected to meet those conditions. Your predicted grades are supposed to meet what you ultimately end up with. North American universities, similar, they expect you to achieve at least close to those predicted grades. They want to see that you are achieving what you were predicted to achieve. UK and Australia are very strict in that. North Americans a little loose, but they still expect you to be fairly close to those predictions. AP, Advanced Placement, we do only offer a few AP courses at ISM as we are an IB diploma program school. A big myth that we hear often is that the US colleges prefer AP to IB. That's not accurate. If a student is in a full IB diploma, it's really not necessary for them to take any AP courses. Again, US universities are looking at holistic applicants. They want to see other things. They want to see community service. They want to see transcripts. They want to see what a student's passions are about. They don't want to just see testing, AP exams. They want to see a more holistic child, which is why we really only recommend students take an SAT or an ACT 2, maybe 3 times. Again, because the universities are saying, what else are these students doing if they're just studying and if they're just taking exams? That they want to see what's going to set you apart as a student. So US colleges do not expect ISM students to submit AP scores unless the student has taken AP US history. That is expected, but other than that, it's not expected. Our courses do not line up with AP course material. So our IB curriculum is going to be very different than the AP material. AP exams are offered at ISM for a wide scope of subjects. So if students want the opportunity is there for students to take it. If taken in junior year, you can submit AP scores as part of your application to US colleges. But again, it is so important that you please don't sacrifice grades and your health by studying for several AP exams. It is not expected. So please, put your health and your grades before the APs. So here's a generic timeline for you. Junior year, we recommend in December through February, somewhere in that time frame, that you're taking your first SAT or ACT for the first time. Typically, students in grade 10 are taking the PSATs. In February through May, if needed, take that SAT or ACT again. And then in June of that junior year is where you can take those SAT subject tests if necessary. The TOEFL and the IELTS, if you do have to take that would be sometime during your junior year is what we would recommend. Senior year, First semester is typically the last time for the SAT and ACT and the subject test if needed. So again, we recommend 2 to maybe 3 times for testing, but definitely no more than that. You're going to plateau out. You're not going to achieve a higher score after 2 to 3 times. An additional thought: junior year transcript and IB predicted scores are way more important than testing. So we can't, it's so important. Do not sacrifice IB scores and grades for higher SAT and ACT scores. You need to find a balance between testing and schoolwork. US universities are going to question that. If it's only academic, if it's only testing, they're going to say, what else did the student achieve? So definitely, don't focus on taking more and more SAT or ACT exams as opposed to your IB courses, and really focusing on those grades and those predicted grades. It's important to keep in mind that how many times you take an exam does not reflect in part your overall allocation of time. How much time you are spending studying for the SAT versus engaging in academic or intellectual endeavors or extracurriculars. How much time are you spending on those? It's just a quick, funny little comic that we have here that you can see. There's students almost looks like they're maybe in kindergarten, that they're at 9 a.m. doing circle time, and by 12 o'clock, they're prepping for SATs. Um, Again, there is time for those things, but life is meant to be enjoyed and academics are meant to be studied, but there are also other things that are so important that are necessary for a college application. So please don't just focus on the SAT and ACT portion, but also, be more well-rounded, branch out, do more things, find the things that you love and enjoy. Here are just some additional resources that you can scroll through at your own time. I know that this has been a whole lot of information. I know that it's a bit dry. I definitely did not receive the most enjoyable or thrilling presentation. So I do, thank you for listening and taking the time to hear. Know that we are here for any questions that you may have. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for spending the evening with me. And I hope you enjoy all of your remaining sessions. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.